Beginning 100 years ago, hundreds of thousands of families from Mexico came to the United States to escape the revolution that left their motherland in shambles. Some of Mexico's most talented families settled here and never went back. This exodus jump-started the Latinization of this country. Now, the children of the Revolucion tell the stories of their ancestors who risked it all to make this journey, helping to make America stronger, prouder, and better.
So a few years ago, I read an essay about the Mexican Revolution and about how it drove a complete population of people from one country to another. That article made me start thinking about the stories that my husband has told me. Both of his grandmothers came to San Antonio during the Mexican Revolution to escape the chaos and the violence there. And both of them came alone, with no husband, with several small children in tow. And I, began to look at the revolution in a new way and think about how many people made that trip, how many women made that trip, what that journey must have been like for those people. And not only that, but all of these miraculous stories of the descendants of the people who came here and how they have changed the destiny of this part of America. And it occurred to me that those stories had not been told, but they hadn't been told out loud publicly. They hadn't been told in books. They haven't been told on television. And they haven't been told in the schools. And so children don't really understand that part of their heritage and how there's so much to be proud of.
When you think about the Mexican Revolution, you think of the male figures of Zapata, of Pancho Villa, and so forth. But the truth is that women played a major part in the revolution.
Que si Adelita quisiera ser mi novia, que si Adelita fuera mi mujer, le compraría un vestido.
There were a lot of women in the camps. They were called Adelitas. And the Adelitas were women who followed the men in battle, and they were behind the forces moving forward.
When the revolution started, Mexico had a large army, but it wasn't very well supplied. And when the army called up its men, they called them up to fight, and they had no quartermaster. They had no supply train. And so when a man was called up, he brought his wife, his girlfriend, sometimes his children with him, and they fixed his clothes, they took care of him when he got sick, they cooked for him, they went and got firewood. And so there's a whole contingent of women that are affiliated with the army in a support role.
There were two kinds of ladies who were conscripted for the army. One was the one who went voluntarily because her boyfriend or her husband was fighting. So she wanted to go to protect him, and she wanted to make sure that he was well fed and well clothed and that he had everything he needed. That Adelita literally gave up her life because she could very easily be killed in crossfire or be kidnapped by the opposing forces.
The Adelitas were the sweethearts, or the Valentinas, the sweethearts, and so there are songs about them, there are stories about them, we see them in the photographs.
They organized themselves to bring information. They were kind of the detectives, you might say. They would be like doing the laundry or doing the cooking or something, but they were listening. So they were the ones that were bringing information into what was going on with the Federales. They were also the ones that were sneaking ammunition and weapons in from the Federales.
But some of them were actually fighters, and many of them were leaders.
I directed a big piece for the Los Angeles Opera a few years ago on the life of Rafael Mendez. And he was kidnapped by Pancho Villa when he was like 10 years old because he played the cornet in his dad's little family band. And he traveled all through the revolution with Villa to play taps and to play music when he wanted it. Pancho Villa was a huge music lover. He used to stop the battle every afternoon at 4 and have his little band play music for him and would take requests from the enemy. They would stop shooting, they have an hour of music, and then they'd go back to shooting. And eventually, after the revolution ended, Rafael then came north and, of course, eventually became a legendary trumpet master. He wound up being the first trumpet for the MGM orchestra during the big heyday of musicals in Hollywood in the 50s, you know, from this little village in Mexico playing taps for Pancho Villa. You can't make that up, you know.
My grandmother, Leonor Aranda, her father had been a mercenary in the revolution. It was not necessarily about having a political position, it was about getting paid and having beans on the table. She comes right in the middle of it. She leaves. She brings her mother up here. Why? To be treated by Dr. Urrutia, because it had been said that he could help the mother who was paralyzed.
The legendary Dr. Urrutia was not your ordinary exile. He had been an extremely powerful figure in Mexico. Some say more powerful than the president himself. So it soon became apparent that he had to leave Mexico.
Dr. Urrutia was a surgeon. He was the private physician to Huerta, and Huerta was at the time the president of Mexico. And Huerta was very, well, I shouldn't say famous, but he was known for silencing opposition. And he did that in many different ways. And a very terrible legend, but it's told in Mexico all the time today, is that one of the ways that he silenced a member of the opposition was to have Dr. Urrutia cut the man's tongue out, which was pretty effective, apparently.
Was Urrutia a miracle worker or a war criminal? Depends on who you talk to.
You know, if you measured what my grandmother did coming from Mexico and working as a maid and a babysitter and a cook for 30 or 40 years and never owning a home and never finishing school and never owning a car, you would say that she never achieved the American dream. But the fact is that she worked hard all of those years to give my mom and to give us a better chance to accomplish it. And so it's almost as if one generation really does pass the baton on to the next one. And this idea that even though they never owned the home or they never owned the car, that they got everybody a lot closer. And for that, I think, for all of their sacrifice, I think we're all grateful. My grandmother had a lot of love for us and for my mother, and I think she had a sense that she had come to the country and she was only able to go so far, having dropped out in elementary school. But she wanted very much for my mother to go on and accomplish her dreams, and she was very proud that we had graduated from high school and then gone on to Stanford. And I'm very happy that toward the end of her life that she could see that we were well on our way to accomplishing good things.
When I was writing The House on Mongo Street, one has to remember that the writer was in her 20s, 21 to 28, which is a crucial decade for a woman's life, and especially a Mexican-American woman's life, because I was looking for my feminism, my own camino, and trying to live my life as a woman of letters. And I was also trying to pay for my apartment and live on my own, which is pretty blasphemous if you're a single Mexican-American woman. And I was also teaching in a very poor Mexican neighborhood in Chicago, the Pilsen community. If you don't write your story down, it didn't happen. It's not history. If you don't write it and document it, it's like that person never existed. And I always feel that love compels me to spend all those hours and years writing precisely so that I can write my version of history. Otherwise, it gets written for you.
I'm convinced that one of the most important dynamics that will be the impetus, the engine of the American future is the presence of Latinos in the United States. As the traditional American population ages, it is the Latino population that is going to bring the youthful energy, the workforce, the creative energies that fuel the future of this country. I mean, it's just a simple matter of mathematics. We are now over 50 million people now, growing to well in excess of 100 million people over the next 4 decades or so. So a huge part of the growth of the United States, which means that everything that relies on growth, markets, consumer products, the growing middle class, schools, entertainment, everything that relies on growth must necessarily involve the Latino. America has some basic decisions to make, I think. We know this population is going to be large, but is it going to be large, underemployed, marginalized, undercompensated, and eventually alienated? Or is it going to be large, talented, creative, an energetic basis for the country's industries and leadership? I believe it's the latter, but I believe we have to work very hard to make it so.